It's Perek Chafei, Pasuk Hey, 25th chapter, Pasuk 5. Ki yeshuach miyachtov. You have brothers, they were all alive at the same time. Explain this. And these are brothers who were related through the paternal side. They all share a common father. Umeis echad mehem. And one of the brothers die, and he dies. When he dies, he's childless. Ben doesn't mean specifically a male son. He has no child. He has no grandchild. Even if he has no child, but let's see, when he dies, his child had predeceased him, but he has a grandchild from that child who predeceased him. The widow of the deceased is not permitted to marry a third party. She's bound to levirate marriage. To the surviving brothers, they have to actually perform levirate marriage. And we'll see, and if in fact they choose not to, she needs a release. The release is called Chalitza. It's a procedure done before the court where she removes, and we'll see in a moment, the shoe of one of the surviving brothers, and there's a certain back and forth. She makes a statement before the Beis Din, and she removes the shoe, and she spits in his presence, and the court makes a pronouncement, and then she's free to remarry. It's the equivalent of a divorce. A divorce, a man marries a woman at the moment of the marriage, and of course the marriage has to conform with the laws of Jewish marriage. So she is bound to the husband, and she is, in terms of a wife-husband relationship, the husband has exclusivity on that woman, and the only way she's permitted to remarry, as the Mishnah says in Kedushin, either if he terminates a relationship with a get, that's a Jewish divorce, or through passing away. The husband dies, then she's permitted to remarry. However, if he dies and there's no children, and there are surviving brothers from the paternal side, she's bound to them, and they perform levirate marriage. As we'll see in a moment, what's the concept of levirate marriage? Yivama yovu aleo. The Yavama, that means the surviving brother, comes upon him, meaning cohabitation. L'kocha lo the isha, and he takes her as a wife, the Yibma, and he does the levirate marriage. And the Bechor means, the Gemara explains it this way, that the mitzvah preferably is done by the oldest surviving brother. That's the Bechor is referring to the surviving brother. And the child that will be born from that marriage or from that union will be in place of the deceased brother. And as a result of this, his name of the deceased will not be obliterated from Jewish people, meaning on a certain level, the soul that will go into that child has relevance to the soul of the deceased. So therefore, this child will be considered a continuation of the line of the deceased. That's the concept of Yibum, of levirate marriage. And as the Gemara explains, there's a concept known as Zika. If a woman is widowed and there are no children, there is a remnant of that original marriage. Normally, if the children, the moment the husband dies, that relationship terminates totally. However, if there were no children and the name has to be perpetuated, and there's somebody who's qualified to take over that position, such as a brother on the paternal side, then there is a remnant of that relationship which remains, and that does not allow her to remarry, because she's still connected to the deceased. And the brother, when he performs levirate marriage, that connection becomes a full developed relationship as a husband-wife. And if she commits adultery After that, it's considered an adulterous act. Before that, it's a Torah violation because she's a woman waiting for levirate marriage to be performed. Just giving you just the general outline. What happens after he dies? The mother of the deceased gives birth to another son. Since that son was not alive at the time of the brother who passed away, the woman, the widow, is not bound to that son, although they're related paternally. And that's what the puzzle begins. Kiyeshu achem yachtov. All the brothers that are part of this equation, which we're discussing, they all had to be alive at the same time. But if any one of them were born after he passed away, the widow is not bound to that brother. So two things. They have to be related paternally, and they all have to be alive at the same time. And only then. So let's say he had a brother that was a newborn when he passed away. And there are no other brothers other than that newborn. That woman is bound, is not permitted to remarry until that newborn becomes an adult, because a minor cannot give chalitza. Even if he's 12 years old, he cannot give the release for her to remarry. So she has to wait until he becomes an adult, and then he performs chalitza. That's the procedure, removing the shoe, and then she's permitted to remarry. That's the law, because she's bound. It's no different than a man marries a woman and he goes overseas and she's a bound woman. Because faction, she's a married woman, she's not permitted to remarry because she's a married woman. Here, she's a woman waiting that since there is a brother in place to take over that relationship, but he's a newborn. So you have to wait. So of course, it would be inappropriate, age-wise, for such a young brother to marry the widow of his older brother's wife. So there, the Gemara says, the Bezdin encourages chalitza. They encourage the surviving brother to give the release, not to marry her. Because there's a pasuk, which Shlomo says, that the ways of the Torah are pleasant and peaceful. The pathways are peaceful. This marriage is not going to work. The Gemara talks about, let's say the surviving brother was a tanner, meaning the husband who passed away was a more refined person, and a tanner was known, the Gemara says, because of the type of chemicals that he would use to tan the hides. There was a stench literally ingrained in his flesh that you couldn't go near the man. He gave off such a bad smell, it was almost intolerable unless you were used to it. This woman marrying this man every day, comes home from work. It's not a livable situation. The court in that case, the Bezdin, they encourage the surviving brother to give chalitza, because they can't put the woman through this torture being involved with the man. Or let's say the surviving brother is a little boy. The surviving brother is an old man and she's a young woman. It's not going to work. And because it's not going to work, and there's not going to be any harmony in that marriage, the court encourages the surviving brother to give chalitza. There should not be Yibum. But if there's Yibum and the marriage doesn't work, then of course it's his wife, he gives a get. And then it becomes much more complicated, because then they have to force him to give a get if it's not a livable situation. But the concept is Yisrael. His name should not be obliterated from the Jewish people. If the man has no interest, take the widow of the brother who passed away, but also the woman goes to the gate where the Bezdin convenes, the elders, the Omro, and she makes a statement before the Bezdin. My brother-in-law, the surviving brother, he refuses, in the word miyun, me'ain, to establish his brother's name in the Jewish people. He doesn't want to perpetuate the name. Law of Yabmi. He doesn't want to go through the procedure of Yibum. The correlation, so the courts, the elders, they summoned the brother, the surviving brother-in-law, the Omar, and he stands before the Bezdin, lo chafatz l'kachto. I'm not interested in taking her. I have no interest. V'niksha yivito elov le'edei has a Canaan. The widow approaches him before the eyes of the elders. This is the chalitza procedure. She removes the shoe from his foot. And the Gemara says that it's first of all, the shoe is made of leather, and it has to be taken off his right foot. It's not his left foot. The Yorka B'fonov, and she spits in his presence of the brother-in-law, the Onsa, the Omro. And she responds and she says, this should be done to the man who does not want to establish the home of his brother, meaning the brother, the deceased. Nikrush Yisrael, and this person who refused to do the chalitza, he's known among Jews, Beis Chalutza now. He's the person who gave chalitza, the removal of the shoe, and he did not want to perform Yibum. So the reason why I'm focusing on this now, I want to speak about the chalitza procedure. So I always mention there's a famous Malbim. The Malbim, a commentator on the Torah, explains that the shoe must be made of leather. That's firstly. If it's made of any other material, it does not qualify to bring about this result, to terminate the relationship between the widow and the deceased, to permit her to marry. It has to be a leather shoe. And what's the concept? Removing the shoe. She removes the shoe and she spits in his presence. She makes this statement. She explains it this way. The Gemara tells us in Shabbos, Rabbi Yochanan explains that if a person has to sell his personal possessions to buy a pair of shoes, leather shoes, it's something you should do. Part of being a civilized human being is to wear leather shoes. That's how important it is. Shoes is, in terms of to identify a person, he should wear leather shoes. It's more than not going barefoot. Leather shoes. At one time, a shoe was considered leather. Of course, it's a whole question on Yom Kippur. You're not permitted to wear shoes. But if it's made of any other material other than leather on Yom Kippur, you're permitted to wear the shoe. Because in terms of what to consider a shoe, it's only made of leather. So he explains it this way. What does the hide of an animal represent? That represents the physical world. And that the human being takes the hide of the animal and turns that hide into a shoe. That means the person continually steps on the hide. That means you're trampling on what? On the animal. It's a statement that the human being is the center of the universe, and everything that exists within creation was created to accommodate the needs of the human being. The animal, you'd say, a human being is an intellectual animal. The animal is an animal. Where do you have a right to kill the animal to use its hide? It's an animal, you're an animal. You're a highest species of animal. The Chalitza procedure, what it declares, the human being is not an animal. The human being is a spiritual being, is a composite of the physical and spiritual, and the world itself was created to accommodate whatever his needs may be, even for him to trample on the animal. So what the leather shoe connotes, that the human being has a right to take the animal, even to trample on it, And that is the representation, the symbolism of the leather shoe. Because man is the center of the universe. There's a Sefarno, before the great flood, the Mabul, a human being was not permitted to eat meat. It was a Torah violation. Only after the great flood, the Torah says to Noach that what was not permitted until now is going to be permitted, and the flesh of the animal is going to be like the vegetation of the field. That was permitted. Before it was not permitted, after it became permitted. What is the rationale? So he explains, the Ramban explains that God created the world and he created the animal. Where do you have a right to take the life of an animal to maintain your life, even though you're a higher species, but you have no right to take a life to maintain your life. However, at the time of the great flood, why did the world continue? The world continued with the merit of Noach. If Noach was not that special person, God would have destroyed the world wouldn't have continued. So all the species that continue to exist, why do they exist? They exist in the merit of Noach. Noach is a representation of mankind. So because the species, living species, only exist because of him, therefore he has a right to partake of them, even to take their lives, to kill them, to maintain whatever his needs may be. His food issues, their hides, to accommodate his needs, whatever they be. That's the Ramban. That's why pre-flood it was not permitted, post-flood it was permitted. That's the way he explains it. The Sephardo explains it differently. That pre-flood, we find that people lived 800 years, 900 years. It was a different reality of the physicality of the world. Meat was not necessary to maintain the existence of mankind. Of course, the level of health, it was unrelated to maintain the health of the human being. After the Great Flood, where the world took on a whole different context of function, it would function at a much lesser level. Man did not live this extended life. Life was a normal life expectancy. And man was subject to many other things. Meat was necessary, this is Sefarno, to maintain his health. Pre-flood, it wasn't necessary. So it's killing in vain. Post-flood, now that the meat is necessary to maintain his existence, therefore the Torah permitted meat after flood. So the meat is like the vegetation of the field. But the Ramban says, no, it's because the world only exists because of man. Therefore, man has a right to take the life of the animal. That's the Ramban. That's post-flood. But what does the hide represent? The hide represents the animal. And when you use it for a shoe, that means you step on the hide, meaning it's a statement. A person says, I have no right to use the hide of the animal. What are you saying? That means the animal is not there for you, for your need. But God says differently. So it's crucial and essential that you have to state your position. The world revolves around the human being. Everything is there to accommodate whatever his needs are, as long as it's not in a wasteful context. So what is the symbolism of taking off the shoe? So the Malbim says it this way. If the woman would not, let's say a man divorces his wife, the brother is not permitted to marry the divorcee of a brother. If a man dies and he has children, the surviving brothers are not permitted to marry the widow of the brother who passed away. And if the brother does in any one of these situations, it's considered an incestuous relationship. And if it's because it's an incestuous relationship, what is the status of the child? The child is a mamzer. The child's considered illegitimate. Only because there was no surviving, there were no children, the Torah says, not only is it not incest, it's permitted and you're obligated. You're obligated to, for the sake of perpetuating the name of the deceased, the right thing is you should perform levirate marriage. You should do Yibum. So the brother's name should not be obliterated from the Jewish people. So what does the Torah want to do? Despite the fact that it's normally incest and the child normally be a mamzer, the Torah says for the sake of perpetuating the name of the deceased, the Torah permits it, even says it's a mitzvah, and the child is considered a kosher Jew. So what happens now? The man is in position to do Yibum. To perpetuate, he can do it. And the man says, I'm not interested. And the woman comes to the court and says, my brother-in-law doesn't want to. So the court says, why don't you want to? So he says to the court, it's not my cup of tea. She's not my cup of tea. So the Torah says Here, God turned over the world, something which is normally an incestuous relationship. The issue of that relationship is normally illegitimate, mamzer. And here, and God did all that, and now you're telling me the reason why you don't want to enter into this marriage to fulfill this mitzvah for that purpose is because she's not for your cup of tea. She's not your cup of tea. So therefore, so you have no choice. If he doesn't want to refuse to do Yibum, you do Chalitza. So what is the procedure? It's a statement. So the Torah says she takes the shoe off the surviving brother, meaning understanding that you have no right to trample on the animal. You're taking a position you know better than the animal. And because you know better than the animal, she removes that leather shoe. You have no right to trample on the animal. That is the procedure of Yibum, of Chalitza, to identify exactly who the brother-in-law is. That is the symbolism which connotes and classifies the brother-in-law where he stands at this point. And to him, it's irrelevant. What about, as I said, the surviving brother is an old man and she's a young girl, or vice versa. Or he has a certain vocation where it's not livable for the woman in that situation, because drochet dachenon. Nevertheless, you go through a chalitza procedure, it's even encouraged, because the other way, it's going to be an intolerable situation. We find that when a person visits the Temple Mount, you're not permitted to visit wearing shoes. You have to take your shoes off. Anybody, you're not permitted to wear a money belt. You're not permitted to go with a walking stick, which normally is a status symbol, like a silver stick, that kind of stick, which indicates not a personal kid to assist him to walk, but rather a walking stick that shows status. A money belt, a walking stick, and shoes. You're not permitted to ascend the Temple Mount with that. Why? It's disrespect. You come with your money belt. Who do you think you are? I have my, my traveler's checks. Some leave your checks home. I have my walking stick, which identifies my pedigree. Something. When you come before God, when whoever you are, you're meaningless. You're negated. Shoes, you have to take the shoes off. Why? The Kohen officiates, that's a different story. The Kohen who officiates, when he does the avodah, he's not even permitted to wear a sock. There, his bare foot has to touch the marble, the floor of the sanctuary. But a visitor who's just visiting, he's not doing the avodah. He's not doing the service of God. But he's not permitted to wear shoes when he comes to the Temple Mount. He has to take his shoes off. Why? Exactly for this reason. Because what does the shoe connote? It connotes who I am. The world revolves around me. When you come before God, there's no me. There's no you. There's only God. Therefore, that's the reason why it's considered a disrespect to wear the shoes when you ascend the Temple Mount for that reason. Lahavdil Elav Abdolas. You ever see pictures of inside of a mosque? They all take their shoes off. Their leather sandals, or whatever kind of shoe they wear. And they have them piled up, and then they go and they do their thing, they bow to Mecca, the Muslims, what's still taking off. Bush was there, one of these people, they took his sandal, they threw at a Bush. They nearly hit him in the face. But that's the idea. To go when you pray by them, it would be a disrespect to wear that sandal when they're praying. Because when you stand and you have that audience, whatever they do, it would be a disrespect to wear those leather sandals or leather shoes. Lahavdil Elav Abdolas. When you ascend the Temple Mount, which is the location of the Shekhinah, of the divine presence, when you stand in the presence of the divine presence, one doesn't wear the leather shoe because of exactly as we're explaining it. Chof Hei Yud Zayin. Chapter 25:17. Zocher Eis Asher Osul Amalek. Remember what Amalek had done to you, Baderech, on the way, and as you were traveling, B'Tzeis Mitzrayim, when you left Egypt. Torah is very specific. Remember what they did to you, and the Torah tells us the location. Baderech, on the way, And what point in our history? When we first left Egypt. We were attacked right after the splitting of the sea and the Yam Suf closing on the Egyptian armies. That's when we were attacked. At that time, we were a nation. We weren't even a nation yet. It was pre-Sinai. We didn't enter into Canaan yet. We had no country. Asher korcha baderech. They came upon us on the way. We'll see Rashi in a moment what this means. And you were weary and fatigued, and they had no fear of God. It's important. The Torah is giving us a certain information. So Zimaldim, which explains, why do people go to war? For what reason? They go to war for land acquisition. They go to war because it's a defensive war, because they're intimidated by the enemy, so they go to war. We were a people without a land. We had no land. We were a people, there was nothing to be afraid of, because we were weary and fatigued. So why did they attack us? Maybe it was a jihad. It was a holy war. Versus Le'yor Elokim. These people did not fear God. There was no God in their lives. So it wasn't because we did not believe in their religion. These people, these Amalekites, had no religion. So why did they attack us? One reason. Because we are the Am Hashem. That because we were God's people, and when we were taken out of Egypt, it was for that purpose, to represent God in the world. That's why they attacked us. That's why they wanted to destroy us. So this is a battle between who? What's this issue? It's because it's between them and God. They wanted to obliterate God's existence from this existence. So what does God say? You know, God does everything measure for measure. Since their objective was to obliterate, that there should be no trace of my existence in the world, that's the level of evil. Therefore, they should not have a trace of existence in this world. And until they're obliterated, there's any trace of their existence, my throne is not complete. When God removes you from all your enemies, Misaviv, Boris, the surrounding enemies, meaning when you conquer the land, when you have the portion to inherit, you should obliterate, eradicate any remembrance of Amalek from under the heavens, lo tishkoch. And you should never forget this. Never. You know, you say things change, time has passed, that they're no longer the same people. Torah says lo tishkoch. If you're able to trace the pedigree to Amalek, there's a mitzvah to destroy them, to obliterate them. Even their possessions, you're not permitted to possess, because their possessions are a representation of who they were. Everything has to be destroyed. So Rashi, Timche Zecher Amalek, you should eradicate the remembrance of Amalek, the Isha Isha, male and female, Be'olad Yonek, even newborns, Bishar Atzer, their cattle, their flocks, Shlo Yeshem Amalek Nizkar, that the name of Amalek should no longer be identified. There's no trace of that they even existed. Afilo Abehemo, even regarding an animal, Lomar, so this animal initially belonged to the Amalekites. You know, when we speak about, Shlomo tells us in Mishlei, Zechat Tzadik Lebrocha. When you mention a Tzadik, he should be mentioned in the context of a blessing. When you speak about an evil person, it's Shem Risham Yirkav. the name of the evil should rot. So whenever you mention a tzaddik, you speak about why he was special. Because God wants that people, he should be a role model, that people should learn from whatever he was. Therefore, we always identify him in the context of blessing, something positive. But Shem Rishoyim, even the name of the evil should rot. There should be no remnant of that. Because what he represents, there should be no takeaway. That person should not be valued at any level. Because that value of the Rosh is contradictory to whatever God wants. Amalek is the most extreme level of Shem Rishon Yirkav. A Rasha, you permit to benefit from his possessions, whatever it is. Amalek, because they're the personification of evil, the rotting Shem Rishon Yirkav, the name of the evil should rot. There should not be a trace of them. There should not be a memory of what they existed. It's interesting. When Mashiach comes, Amalek will be destroyed. They will be destroyed because that's V'hoy Hashem l'melech al kol haaretz, v'yom yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. We read in the end of the portion of Bishalach that when we were attacked over there, it says, Hashem says, Ki al case ko. Case is referring to the throne of God. My throne is not complete until Amalek is obliterated from existence. So when Mashiach comes, Amalek will be obliterated. There won't be a trace of them. You have a Holocaust museum, and you speak about the Nazis, Yamach Shimon, pictures of Hitler, whatever it is. It's not going to be. That is all going to be obliterated. Because anything that has to do with them, there's not going to be a trace of that civilization, of that nation, of their representation, what they were. You're not even an animal. To say that animal belonged to the Amalekites, even that has to be destroyed to that degree.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.